what if we had an alternate of the real world, not the North America world? Well, North America, yes. In this world, there was no weird random countries. It's still the U.S., Canada, and all these countries down here. But what if I chose the events of the timeline, and I was God over this world, and I chose all of the events? Well, there's still a couple of Cold Wars that are still going on. So this is the alternate history of the world. This is the timeline and the story I will be creating as well. So first is the Russo-Ukrainian War. Yeah. Yeah. And we also have the Israeli-Palestine or Israeli-Gaza conflict. That war is practically almost over. And will probably end in its decisive Israeli victory as well. Yeah. Europe, I think Europe basically starts to send troops to the ground, but it's not all Europe does, as Ukraine is basically ran out of everything. This basically almost starts a war with Russia. So, but basically they said, you know what, we want to send troops to the ground, but we're not gonna do it. If we're risking nuclear war here, come on. Okay, but some countries do, with pose in practically a massive proxy conflict. But I think even with this, Ukraine still loses the war, as Russia is then far better than anyone expected to be financially independent from Western powers. This causes Ukraine to lose the war and exist effectively here. Russia gets to get all of the annexed territory, and Ukraine is just a sad of its former self. Will Ukraine be able to survive in its current state as well, given the demographic crisis, the life expectancy crisis Ukraine has, of most Eastern Europe as well? But basically, they said they could because Donald Trump becomes president. Basically, he forces a peace deal with Russia and the West, basically forcing Ukraine to become a neutral country. And if that violation is broken, well, the U.S. will not intervene, as it'll be Europe's problem. This makes Europe very angry and have skepticism that Trump may force the U.S. to leave NATO, but Congress says no. But Trump doesn't have to act upon the NATO Article 5 if Ukraine is invaded, as Ukraine is not a member state as well. Meanwhile, in the East, another war breaks out. Of course, China versus Taiwan as well. Also will be leaving NATO and blue. All NATO members will be put into blue as well. Will NATO survive? That'll be up to me, as I am saying the story. Yeah. China, however, wants Taiwan, as they claim Taiwan as theirs. They waited until Trump became president because Trump doesn't want war with China. So, taking that to the advantage, Taiwan is swiftly taken over. And now is annexed into China. Another war that happens is between Egypt and Ethiopia. Egypt built a dam that basically dammed the Nile, and Ethiopia doesn't like it. But they have to go through Sudan first, which is still embroiled in a civil war. The red side supports Egypt, and the blue side is on the side of Ethiopia. Yeah. As well. Yeah. This starts the Horn of Africa War, which is going to be one of the deadliest wars in modern history. All these countries have a lot of people and may create one of the worst refugee crises in history. Also, if the warming climate doesn't help either, as well. So South Sudan South Sudan is not part of this war. South Sudan, then Eritrea, Somalia, and Egypt fight against Ethiopia, Somaliland, Djibouti, and the one government of Sudan. Ethiopia starts to invade this part of Sudan. Also, Ethiopia, alongside of Somaliland, starts to invade Somalia as well, creating a massive cataclysmic refugee crisis for Somalia. This starts to make the EU even less immigrant friendly because of this war, as millions of people have been displaced. Egypt, a lot of people have been moving to the Balkans, Italy, and Turkey, and to Arab Gulf states, and even Iran, and heck, a few even went to Russia. But a lot of them have been going to other Arabic countries as well. Same thing with the Sudanese, which have only been fleeing from the country into surrounding states. Same thing with South Sudan and Somalia moving towards other African countries. Somalia's government collapses as well and is forced to recognize Somaliland's independence. This war, because basically Egypt is screwed, as well as Egypt's citizens are uprising against itself as well, creating one of the biggest uprisings in history. Well, Egypt's government is basically disposed, and Ethiopia wins this war. South Sudan and Eritrea exit because they know they can't win against Ethiopia. Ethiopia, despite being embroiled in its own civil conflicts with its ethnic minority, the Tigray population, however, Ethiopia does win a war against its neighbors, showing that Ethiopia could be a future superpower in Africa in the future. A civil war in Nigeria breaks out between Islamists and Christians. The end of the civil war basically splits Nigeria into two. Nigeria, which was a promising rising star in Africa, now is split into an Islamic North Nigeria and a Christian South Nigeria. And basically an exchange of population very similar to India and Pakistan occurs. Well, all Muslims living in the southern portion move to the north of Nigeria, and all Christians move to the Christian majority area, leaving this area like 95% Muslim and this area 95% Christian as well. With the Christian having more atheists and the Muslims basically, well, you know how Muslims are with, minority religions. Let's look at Saudi Arabia and Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan as examples. Here. Somaliland is officially a country. Yes. After all this time, Somaliland is officially a country. Also, East African Union is created. This country is going to likely become the largest superpower in Africa. The DRC is in the East African Cooperation as well, which will basically be in the African Cooperation and Union Pact as well. Both countries have basically decided to sign a military and economic tie to each other. DRC may no longer be the world's poorest country either, as this military and economic pact basically guarantees both countries' futures and security and economic outputs as well, giving both countries a status as a rising star. Ethiopia and Somaliland also joined this pact. Basically, this is an economic pact as well, but Ethiopia and Somaliland all are interested in the economic, but Congo is interested in the military as well. And a lot of these civil wars in these countries are resolved, and this country is both both the DRC and East African Federation have basically stonks rising. The GDP is rising faster than the rest of Africa as well. The US has basically abandoned the Middle East at this point as well. The US doesn't have enough in Congress to get rid of NATO at this current moment, but some countries in Europe do lead the EU and NATO. Hungary and Poland. So Poland gets a right-wing government, and Hungary gets a right-wing government, and the AfD gets elected in majority somehow. They got the majority of our parties, but they have enough where we get around so much where majority leaves NATO. This is a very scary prospect as all three countries just left NATO at once. So basically, they make Ukraine a NATO member state, which pisses off Russia, causing Russia to create its own version of NATO. Russia creates the Russian version of NATO, which is the Eastern Cooperation and Military Pact. Belarus, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, North Korea, and China join this pact, create a military alliance between all the countries. All of these two other Western countries joined the pact as well. Basically created opposition to the Western allies. They also considered NATO expanded towards the Pacific Ocean, which is something they've been planning for a while. So Japan and Korea are a part of NATO as well. And surprisingly, Philippines joins it. NATO is renamed from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to the Defenders of Democracy Organization as well. And of course, now the most corrupt country of this organization is now the Philippines, as the Philippines only joined for safety against China, as they don't want China invading their lands as well. However, more conflicts happen in Africa. The Sahel region breaks out into even more violence here. Well, basically, the Sahel region just breaks out into even more violence because of global warming as well. And a lot of these countries simply just collapse as well. Niger collapses, Mali collapses, and Chad also collapses, which means we are now in a Chadless world. Also, Burkina Faso collapses because of global warming, so these countries are now just a void as well. New governments, however, pop up very quickly, as Africa is quick to adapt to this. Several new countries are created as well, including, I think this place is called like Aswald or something, and this, of course, is Mali. This is, of course, Shanghai, and this is, of course, the Sahara state, and this is just Chad as well. And Central African Republic is also split into two countries. We'll be calling it the East and West Central African Republic as well. Well, but Africa has become West Africa has become more balkanized alongside Central Africa. As well, also the four gained its independence from Sudan because of the collapse of Sudan, giving the four an independent state as well. Here, Libya also splits into the states. I actually do not know the states on top of my head, but I know one's called like Tritoponia, Trioponia, and this is just like, that would just be the remnants of Libyan government. Because this country has been put into free anyways, as well. Also, so another pact is formed called the North American Pact. Basically, it's just a pact between the US, Canada, and Mexico. We'll be putting a orange dot for this pact as well for US and Canada. This is basically to secure the human rights and democracy in North America as well. As all three countries continue to kind of converge as well, and could become a new civilization of New America as well. However, Cuba and Central America does not join as well. However, this alliance is basically a much more fair economic alliance as well. But Mexico did elect a newer government as well. Also, it allows for free and legal crossings between all three countries. Of course, this is to basically prevent any illegal crossing between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico as well, and to put a stop to that overall. Europe is going into chaos as Italy leaves NATO, as Italy elects even a farther right leader than Giorgia Meloni, and yeah, the year also gonna put the year out, which is now 2030, which this is supposed to be when Agenda 2030 goes out. A lot of countries leave the EU because of Agenda 2030, basically putting NATO and the EU into collapse as well. NATO still stays around, but without Italy and NATO, a lot of countries just don't want to be in NATO anymore. NATO has basically become a rum state. NATO did not last forever. The Eastern countries are now laughing at NATO, essentially, as basically they are tearing themselves apart and isolating Eastern Europe from it. Ukraine, because for some reason they still have Zelensky as the president, as Ukraine is also very corrupt like Russia and keeps the same leader for like 10 years. Also, Turkey and Russia do have new leaders, as Putin is dead and Erdogan is dead by 2030. So basically, they have new leaders. I do not know the names, but they have new leaders as well. Trump is, of course, no longer president by 2030, but someone else is now president. And basically, he got rid of NATO and the US as well. So the collapse of NATO is happening at a very fast rate, which means instead last time it was the communist bloc that collapsed, it is the West that is collapsing. Whereas again, many people saw this coming as the West is becoming more and more decadent. The Balkans see this as no longer a solution as well, which makes Ukraine one of the last members of NATO. Also, Canada collapses as well, as for some reason Justin Trudeau is still the Prime Minister of Canada. Canada basically starts a revolution against Justin Trudeau and deposes him with a new leader. We don't know what that new leader will do, but basically NATO is now in the remnants as well. Yeah. Also, so because of the collapse of NATO, there is now a Eastern Cooperation Pact between Japan. Okay, this is a part of Russia, not Japan. Korea, Philippines, and Australia. This is basically just to defend against China in case China ever gets too aggressive. If the US, because the US is going into an isolationist era, well, they decided to go for the second best thing, which is Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand are still very economically powerful countries, and are still allies of Philippines, Japan, and Korea as well. Also, the EU has collapsed as well. And the US goes into hibernation mode like in the 2030s. Also, we have a big event happening, the Second Great Depression, which happened in 2029, which is also partially the reason why NATO and the EU collapsed. But don't worry, the East is not affected, is also affected gravely as well, as China also faces a revolution of its own. We'll see what happens on the next episode of the Alternate History of the World, as Alternate Future of the World Part 2 as well.